Keep Growing Detroit is cultivating a food sovereign city. And so for us, that means over half of the fruits and vegetables consumed by Detroiters are also grown by Detroiters in Detroit. Food is a really great lens into climate change, right? Because the way that we produce food is contributing to climate change, but also climate change is affecting food production. Climate change is making weather patterns less predictable. It also makes your crops more vulnerable. On the other side of things, the way that we produce food on a large scale is unsustainable, and that it's wreaking havoc on our soil health. Also, it takes an incredible amount of energy to produce food on a large scale. And so when we're thinking about the future that we want to live in, and when we're thinking about how to locally have a positive effect on the climate and giving back to the earth instead of just taking, we want folks to have access to food that tastes good, that people are being fairly compensated for, food that is regenerative, food that is putting nutrients back into the soil. Detroit has this really rich history of growing food. When we think about food, right, it's a way of knowing who we are and where we came from, and also a way of being connected to the earth. And so when our ancestors brought farming and gardening practices with us to the north, that was a way of remembering where we came from and who we are, and taking care of the land and taking care of our families, taking care of our communities. The Detroit Black Land Fund, in partnership with Detroit Black Community Food Security Network and Oakland Avenue Urban Farm, was a fund that was started because we've seen that white farmers are more easily able to acquire land than black farmers, even though there are more black farmers in the city than there are white farmers. Just being able to afford the land that you want to farm on is a huge barrier. So what if we just raise the money to work with farmers to help them navigate the process of buying the land and help them just get the land? So we were able to raise, I think, about $55,000 for black farmers to be able to purchase their land in the city. Last year, we supported over 1,600 gardens and farms through our Garden Resource Program. So members of our Garden Resource Program are recipients of Grown in Detroit transplants. They also have access to compost, cooking classes, gardening classes. This year, we're past 1,900 gardens and farms. So we've gotten a lot of new family gardens this year, and folks who have signed up for the Garden Resource Program have expressed that they're feeling the vulnerability of the food system, right? In part due to COVID, but also because of climate change. And they want to be able to grow food for their family where they're at. This year, we've also focused more on not only growing where you're at, but also how to preserve food and how to reduce waste. Creative ways of using the food that you're growing and working with abundance. So when I think about growing where you're at and what I can do to create a more resilient local food system for myself, my family, and my community, I think a lot about my dad. He grew up in rural Illinois and came to Detroit in the 80s. So when I joined the Garden Resource Program, I was so excited to share the Garden Resource Program with him. And growing up, I just had no interest in spending time on a farm. I was a city girl. I grew up in Detroit. I don't want to go to the middle of nowhere. I just didn't have that connection to my food in the way that he did. And so when I joined the Garden Resource Program, it was really exciting to be able to grow with him. It was also really cool to see how it just was second nature to him. Even though he hadn't grown food in so long, it just so quickly came back to him. And so when I think about creating sustainable, thriving, resilient communities, I think about growing with my family, and I think about growing in my backyard with my dad. That's one thing that I love about growing up in Detroit and living in Detroit, is that we've used food and growing food as a way of keeping our communities intact.